Good evening. Welcome to tonight's devotional. We're beginning a short series where we're looking at how to relate to one another. And the first relationship we're going to be looking at is that of children to parents. And there's there's two words that they use in the scriptures for how children should relate to their parents. The first one is obey, and the second is honor. We're going to look briefly here in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. It says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." And then it quotes from the Old Testament, "Honor your father and mother." And then it ends the quote, "which is the first commandment with a promise." And then continues it, "so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth." That's a pretty big promise right there. So that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy a long life on the earth. Now, those two different words are taken from different contexts in which you can see the different ways in which children are supposed to relate to their parents. The first one is to obey. Now, when you run across this word, you also run across a distinction amongst children. So you have children that are both adults and minors. And so there's a word for children that is minors, and that is the one that is used with obey. And obey doesn't leave a whole lot of wiggle room. That's what you're supposed to do. Your father, your mother tells you to do something. You're supposed to obey and do it, unless, of course, it's to go against the very rule of Christ, which is the heading of this entire chunk of scriptures to relationships. We're supposed to be submitting one to another out of reverence for Christ. And so if they ask you to do something against the will of God, then that's your caveat. You are not required to obey your parent if they tell you to murder your brother or command you to go steal something from the neighbor. So that's the umbrella of all of the relationship discussion is within the reverence for Christ. And so if they have you do something outside of that, that's the caveat. Christ is your king. You obey him first. But if you are a minor child in our society, if you are under 18, you are required to obey your parents. And there's good reason for that. Number one, your parents know more than you do. They've experienced life. They may not be more intelligent. They may not be more perceptive. They may not be a whole lot of things, but they're basically you plus experience. They're you plus experience. They know better. Number two is they have your best interests at heart. They truly desire for you to flourish in this life. And so their commands to you are not commands to harm you, but to give you a hope and a future, like God, our Heavenly Father, is to us. So the first way in which we relate to our parents in order to honor God is to obey them. The second is honor them. And this does not end when you become an adult yourself. You're supposed to honor them your whole life. So this is the other word for child, which would be progeny, if you will. Somebody that, for instance, myself, I am the child of my parents. And I'm 45 years old. But I am still commanded to honor my father and my mother, that it may go well with me and that I may enjoy a long life on the earth. Or in the Old Testament, even more specific to the Jews, was that you may enjoy a long life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Honor them. Now, how is this different? Obedience is to do what they tell you to. Honor is to not shame them. Those are the opposites, honor and shame. Sometimes you could honor your parents by doing the exact opposite of what they tell you to. The clearest way to honor them is to live your life honorably. Most people confuse honor with obey. to do as they have asked. Now, there's a huge overlap with honor and doing as they have asked. One of the ways you can honor your father and your mother is by living a godly life. Within this, even more specifically, I would say a great couple of tips is that you should communicate with them in such a way that they know that you are grateful for the fact that they have raised you, that they sacrificed themselves that you may improve in this life and be able to have the best life possible. You can honor them. If you've had godly parents, it's so much simpler. If you've had ungodly parents, if you had parents that abused you or maltreated you, you are still required to honor them, not shame them. And then I would say, go back to the first word. And I don't mean obedience. I mean, honor them by living a godly life. Who you are in this world reflects upon them and upon your Heavenly Father. I remember when, years ago now, I was dropping my wife off where she was working, and it was a private Christian college in Southern Maryland. And somebody called me Mr. Ward. It struck me as odd. I was still quite young. It struck me as odd for some student to call me Mr. Ward. But it didn't just strike me odd because I was young and it's not normal to be called Mr. at that stage of life, I guess. Or maybe it is normal at that stage of life, but it wasn't yet normal to me. And what really struck me, though, was that that's what people call my dad. And it hit me that I am carrying around a name that others have carried before me. And I should not live in such a way as to bring shame to the name we have shared. May I live my life in such a way that Mr. Ward is not lessened, but strengthened. I pray the same is true for you. Of course, with opposite genders, if you happen to be female, Miss or Mrs. Ward would, anyway. I do not want you to be confused. There are some parents out there who were not good parents. You are still required by God to honor them. And you can do so by living a godly life and by increasing the stock of the name that you carry. I hope and pray that this has been helpful to you. I also hope and pray that you are willing to submit to Christ and to prove it by obeying your parents as a minor and by honoring them the entirety of your life, not just theirs. May our great God and King bless you and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. And may you find it joyful to obey your parents as a minor and to honor them your whole life long. Thank you and good night.